We live. All right, take two. I apologize for that, folks. Welcome back to the Out of Vaseline podcast. I'm your host, Brady Hauser. On tonight's show, we have legendary racing announcer Jim King here with us. And Jim, well, tech these days, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It just happened to crap the bed on me right in the middle of filming, but luckily there's the redo button on here. So again, appreciate you coming on the show here tonight.
No, no problem at all. No problem at all.
So we were talking about what Jim King has been up to as of late. Of course, stepped away from the microphone for a little bit. Then you came back and you went and announced at Honda for the 50th anniversary of your announcing career. But what has Jim King really been up to as of late?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I live about 68 miles from New Smyrna, and I live about 92 miles from Volusia and Daytona. And at this point in my life, used to be I didn't mind driving 9 hours to go do a race, and I did it many, many times. But now, the thought of here in Florida to get to Volusia, to get to New Smyrna, I have to drive on I-95, and doing that in the afternoon at 4 o'clock or to go to the track is fine. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, coming home on I-95, that's nothing. That isn't anything I'm interested in anymore because it's nuts out there. It's 6 lanes of chaos.
Uh, I've been on that road before. I know how that is.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, uh,
Well, I mean, Jeff Bodine is a good friend of mine. He only lives a little ways away, and
mhm.
he's been after me for 3 years now to go to New Smyrna on Saturday night. And I just don't, I really don't have the interest anymore, to do that and to have 7 classes of cars. That's even worse.
So Jeff Bodine, as in the NASCAR Jeff Bodine,
Yes, yes,
how
yes.
did you become friends with him?
Well, I knew him from way back in the days when the All-Star League came to Fonda. Back in the late 60s. And back in that period of time, I can't remember the dates, but he came to Fonda with that Valiant, that number 99 Valiant, because there was a whole bunch of asphalt tracks in the All-Star League, and there was a whole bunch of dirt tracks, and the two drivers representing each track went to all the tracks, Islip and Fonda, Lebanon Valley, all the tracks. And then they had a championship chase, and they determined an All-Star League champion at the end of the year.
Nice.
Different concept. It was a different concept when they went to a dirt track.
Mhm.
Guys like Richie Evans and Jeff Bodine and they were kind of out to lunch. And then it was the same thing around when they went to an asphalt track, but it was a little bit different because Lazaro and several of those guys raced on both. So Fonda always had a bit of an advantage because he raced for Fonda, and he was almost as good on the asphalt as he was on the dirt.
So how cool is it getting to be friends with somebody like that? Obviously, Jeff Bodine has got quite the history in racing, NASCAR,
Well,
dirt racing. I'm sure that's going to be pretty cool getting to be friends with him.
I was a pretty good friend with Richie Evans, and Jerry Cook and I have been friends forever. And Tiny Milano, from down in Orange County, and all them guys, Carl Collis and all them. When you're the announcer, when you're announcing, see, my dad had race cars at Fonda from 1955 until 1984.
Mm.
So we were there during the reign of terror of Pete Corey and Steve Danish and Jeep Herbert and Irv Taylor and Jack Farquhar and Jack Johnson and Lou Lazaro. I mean, we were there. So back, it was
Mm.
everybody helped everybody. I mean, it wasn't unusual. One night Lazaro had trouble, and we went out in the parking lot and took a radiator out of a pickup truck and put it in his race car so that he could race that night.
Really?
That's the kind of stuff that used to happen. They don't have these. We didn't have $4,000 Arch radiators back in those days.
So you guys legitimately went into the parking lot and took
Oh
a
yeah,
radiator out of some. I hope you know the person whose truck it was.
yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. We knew who it was. Yeah, it was Red Canoblo's truck radiator, and he ran Red's radiator service in Johnstown, so he had a lot of radiators.
All right, well, that's good then. Uh, let's talk a little bit about your announcing career now.
Okay.
How did you first get introduced into announcing, and what was your first event you
Well,
announced that?
I started out. I was doing sports and news at WIZR in Johnstown for Joey Caruso. And then I was doing Gloversville and Johnstown football and Gloversville and Johnstown basketball. I was uh, following the basketball teams and the football teams, and wherever they went, we went, and we did the broadcast of the football games, and we did the broadcast of the basketball games. John Malone worked with me on the broadcasts, and so that's how it started. And then during the summer, we were looking for something to do. So a friend of mine and I, Russ Berg was the Fonda track photographer, and he retired. And Jimmy Gage offered it to me and Bob Maneri, and we went to Fonda as the track photographers. And that first night that I announced at Fonda, I was sitting on the fence on the inside of the second turn, waiting for the races to start. And Jimmy Gage Jr., who was the promoter at that time, came out to me and he said, "I need an announcer." I said, "Well, what are you talking to me for? I never did it." He says, "Well, I need somebody." I said, "Well, go get Pete Slovic. He can do it." He was the pit announcer. He lined the cars all up and everything. And he came back about 20 minutes later. He says, "Pete won't do it. You'll do me a great big favor if you'll go up and do that for me tonight." That was the first time I ever did it. And then it was on for years, because then he wouldn't let me out. He put me in, locked me in the tower and wouldn't let me go away.
Absolutely. Now, here's my question for you. So, as when you were announcing, did you ever step into a race car at all?
Uh, no, I was a motorcycle guy. I raced motorcycles, flat track, type motorcycles, and I never was. My brother drove dirt modifieds, and he was really pretty good, but I never, his wasn't. I wasn't involved in that. I worked on him and messed with him and traveled all over the country with him, but I never even wanted to drive one.
Hmm. Now, here's my question. If, as an announcer, do you think it's kind of, because we talked about this, I've done a couple of podcasts with other announcers. Do you think it's important to have some racing, like a little bit of seat time behind your belt as an announcer? You think it would be kind, is it an
I,
advantage as an announcer?
Not really. I can't imagine why you would have an advantage. And the way an announcer gets an advantage is when he goes in the pits and he sees everybody.
Hmm.
During my years of
Hmm.
announcing, I was in the pits at every race. I can show you pictures where Jack Johnson and I are sitting on tires in his trailer. I can show you pictures of me and Louis sitting down by the outhouse in the infield at Fonda back in the day. And that's how you find out things.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's nice to have an ad book, and all these guys now have ad books.
Oh,
And just I've been all the times I've been to Fonda, in the last years since I wasn't a regular announcer anymore, was the ad book is God now.
mm,
I mean, I listened and I've listened. I had Flow Racing. I watched on Flow Racing, but I very rarely ever hear anything about the driver other than he's from Schenectady, New York, and who 3 or 4 sponsors on his car are, and that he's got this number of feature wins, and I know they're getting that from Ron Zerba. I mean,
mhm.
now these guys get all that information that's handed to them page by page. They don't have to go back and find out that this driver got his very first win on Friday night the week before at Accord. That stuff, you never hear that stuff, and that bothers me a lot.
Absolutely, and I've learned that from Dave Moody myself as a I'll becoming an announcer. I always go, and I agree with you. Always going into the pits and getting the stories from the drivers and stuff. Because and sometimes they're not even racing related, but it's good to have that information, obviously, to tell to the crowd or whatever. Because you never
Yeah.
know, and sometimes people like hearing that stuff, and I agree. Talking to the drivers, I was just curious on your opinion there if announcers should race or not. Which I mean, I've stepped in a race. I've stepped in a race car. I haven't drove a race car, but I've stepped into a two-seater car, and I know how it is. I don't think I would
Yeah.
ever want to get in one. I think I'd rather hold the microphone and announce it because it's not something that you just get into and be okay with. But
No, and like I traveled. I was doing uh back when I was really busy. I was doing 4 or 5 races a week. I was traveling, when the Super Dirt series was going on, the All Star League. I was always all over the place. I was doing Albany, Saratoga on Friday, Fonda on Saturday, and I was traveling out west out to Weedsport on Sunday, and it just was busy, busy, busy. I mean, you put yourself in a position, and if when you get popular, when people like to listen, then you're really busy, and then you got to make the commitment, yes or no, and then you're stuck. You know what I mean? You're just locked in, and when your mother and father want you to go to a reunion or something, I can't go. But sometimes it causes a little friction in the family, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, that's a part of it for sure. We got a question in the chat here. The live feed chat comes from Mike Runkle, and this is kind of throwing it right out there. What is Jim King's favorite announcing memory at Fonda Speedway?
My favorite announcing memory of Fonda Speedway was way back in the day when Howie Krantz, who drove the 9C, Howie came from Middletown, Nazareth, short track and all that down there. And they had, I think it was one of the icebreaker races way back in the day. And he and Lou Lazaro ran 3 laps side by side. And when they came to the finish, I called Krantz, and I was told later that Krantz didn't win by the promoter.
Hmm.
Lou Lazaro won. And to this
Okay.
day, I have a picture that shows Howie Krantz, taken by a photographer that shows Howie Krantz, a few inches ahead of Louis at the line. But who could tell? Because, I mean, your announcer's booth isn't exactly on the finish line at Fonda Speedway. And we didn't have electronics in those days. They could tell you that Louis won it by 1,000th of a second, or Howie won it by 1,000th of a second. But it was interesting. It was one of those controversial Saturdays. It was fun. Another one was the night Jack Johnson won the Schaefer qualifier at Fonda, made an illegal pit stop and got disqualified. And I was one of 2 people in the racetrack that knew who won the Syracuse qualifier that day. It was Ralph Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
Ralph Holmes won the Syracuse qualifier.
So looking back, because of course we're in the modern 2023 here. Now looking back at those days, how hard was it as an announcer? Like, because like you said, when you announced that race, you didn't know like you have the picture of him winning, but he didn't actually get the win because there was no
Well,
scoring
I
marker
didn't get
there.
I didn't
How?
get the picture until like 4 days later. So I was informed by the promoter that Howie didn't win the race, Louis won the race. So since he's the promoter and I was just the announcer, it's one of those deals. Here, take your money, shut up, and go home. So I took my money, I shut up, and I went home.
Now, when you were announcing back then, did you kind of wish now, like looking nowadays, you kind of wish you had that technology back then to help you out, or you think it was still fun either way?
No, it was, the group we had. Now we're talking about Fonda specifically. The group we had back in those days at Fonda, the scorers were Anita Farina and Eleanor Vine, and the officials were Nick Nichols and John Nichols. They were the handicappers and the lineup guys and everything, and we were like a big family. We were a family unit, and we had Jim Gage and as the promoter, and Ralph Company or Ronnie Company as the track manager. And it was kind of cool in those days because those 2 guys really worked to get cars there for a big show. All the communication we had was Area Auto Racing News and Gator News, and you had to wait for that to come in the middle of the week. And so those guys beat the drum. They would travel to get guys to come from Rolling Wheels and Weedsport and 5 Mile Point and all those places to come in for their big races. And it was a pretty neat deal. And back in those days they didn't have enclosed trailers, so I got to stand up there and watch them come across the bridge and say, "Oh, here comes Jack Johnson across the bridge," because they were all open trailers. Here comes Danny Murtaugh from Middletown across the bridge, and here comes Alan Johnson and Danny Johnson coming from the west, and here's Will Cagle. I mean, that was, people used to love that. That was a big thing. And now these guys come in with the trailers, and unless the numbers on them, they have no idea who's there.
Mhm.
And again, that goes into knowing everybody, and knowing, all that kind of crap, but it was, it was fun. It was a good time.
Absolutely. Now, so working at Fonda, you've seen many races. Is there any like races in particular that you look back at you wish that like the outcome was different, or you wish that somebody would have won,
No,
or
no. I when somebody new won a race, I was in heaven. I loved it. I loved first time starters. When I
mm,
was announcing
same.
announcing at Orange County Fair Speedway for 5 years, 4 years, I had 1 year at Orange County where Brett Hearn won 11 times and Carl Collis won 10 times. And one other guy won a race, and that was Tiny Milano from Yonkers, New York. He finally won a race, and I won $20 that night because I bet the promoter that that Milano would finish in the top 10. I mean, and he just got out front. The track was dry, it was slick, it was shiny, and for some reason, Hearn and the Collis brothers, started deep in the pack, and they didn't catch him until there was like one lap to go, and Tiny was sideways all the way around the track, but he held on to get the win that night.
Mm. Now,
That was fun.
that sounds pretty interesting, and you won $20 out of it, so that's
Yeah, it
that's
was
always a
fun.
good thing too.
Yeah. Another one was Lou Lazaro's last win at Fonda. That
Mhm.
night, I almost lost my mind that night because Louis got out front early and got away, and he was out there. I don't know. I'm guessing 15 or 20 car lengths, and Mike Romano broke out of the pack, and he was coming like a rocket, and then laps were winding down, and with about 5 to go, Mike caught him.
Mhm.
And I told the crowd that night, if Mike Romano bumps Lou Lazaro tonight and takes him out, he might as well drive right in his trailer and go home, because that place, it's on. That call that I made that night is on YouTube. You can get that call on YouTube. Yeah, it's out there.
I think I've seen it actually, because I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have seen that out there. Yeah, no, I'm sure that I wasn't alive, of course, when Louis had his final win, but I've heard my dad was at that race. He was working on AJ Romano's car at the time, and
Right, right.
I've heard stories from other people that was a moment that many people will never forget because of how special it was.
Yeah.
But, yeah,
And
no,
I
I
got
agree.
I got to announce Kenny Hansen's only win. I got to announce Andy Romano's win at Fonda. I got to do a lot of those where you'd get a one. We'd have triple 20s some night, and you knew that somebody knew had a shot to win, which was good. They get out front and takes the big guns that take them a little while to get loose, and that's what made the job fun, Brady. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And it's the Twin Twenties are still like that today. I look at Utica Rome a couple weeks ago with two winners that were
Yeah,
it was pretty cool to see a first time winner and then a winner that hasn't won in a while. Jamaica Soul and Alex Payne won that, and a lot of people had Shepard and Friesen and all the bigger dogs coming to win that. But when you're in a race car, 20 laps goes pretty quick, and
oh yeah.
if you don't get on it in the first lap, you're not getting up there.
Especially at Fonda, back in the day,
Yeah.
when Kenny Shoemaker held the track record, it was like 19.241 seconds or something like that. And if you go 20 laps at 19 and change a second, the race don't last very long, So, you know,
Mhm.
anybody coming from the middle or the back, they're going to need some help to get to the front in those type of a situation.
Absolutely. So to sum up the Fonda Speedway topic here, what does the Track of Champions mean to you overall?
Oh my God. I mean, I went to the first time I went to Fonda Speedway was 1954. My grandfather took me to Fonda in 1954. And then the next year, when Dad had cars there, I mean, I had to go down, my grandfather and I had to go down there and sit in the bleachers in a certain spot because my mother, and the races started at 8 o'clock, and there was only one division of cars. So we had to go down there and sit and save her a seat so she could walk in at 5 minutes of 8 and go sit in her seat and watch the races. So, that's the way it was back in those days, you
Mhm.
know. It was
Mhm.
fun. It was a lot of fun. I mean, you're talking Irish Jack Murphy and Nolan Swift and Steve Danish and Pete Corey and Jeep Herbert and Irv Taylor and all those guys. They were all running Fonda back in those days. Billy Rafter, Jim Hurtubise. I was there when Jim Hurtubise won his only race at Fonda Speedway.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, so jumping into the next topic here, you may know this or may not. I'm the current announcer at Royal Mountain for the Supercross.
Yeah, I was only
You did that for a little bit as well.
20 years.
How yeah, about that? So yeah, I know I know how the dirt bike world is. So
Yeah.
jumping from announcing stock cars to two-wheel dirt bikes,
Well,
how much more different is it? How much more do you have to prep as when you did it? How much prep did you put into it?
at Royal,
Yeah.
I kept a key, an ongoing key, for Royal, but I didn't do just Royal.
Hmm.
I was doing the whole District 4 tour. Basically, I went to all the tracks. So I was there. I was the announcer, the voice of Unadilla for 12 years.
Hmm.
And I did a whole bunch of the national events as well, a whole bunch of the different tracks. And but it was pretty easy because I saw, like I saw them every week.
Hmm.
Most of them pros and semi-pro and amateurs, the ones that are chasing the District 4 championship. You saw them guys at Moto Masters. You saw them at Frozen Ocean. You saw them up in Granville. You saw the same guys basically all the time.
Oh yeah.
So it was pretty easy to remember who they were. And if they changed a different bike and came with a different colored bike, then you were kind of going, wait a minute, who's that? But
Hmm.
until you figured it out. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now getting announced on the national tour. Well, first off, who were some of the heavy hitter, like the names that were the bigger names on the national tour that when you were announcing the national tour, and
Oh,
how cool was it getting to announce the tour?
Bubba and all them guys were out there then. The GOAT, the greatest of all time. They were all out there then. And I sat one day in Unadilla at the National. I was sitting there, and Bubba and his dad came up into the tower, and I never seen a bigger man than him in my whole life. And he sat down next to me in the tower. He had a watch that was about the size of a army helmet on his wrist. It was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It was good. Unadilla was a lot of fun. It was different, because it was Unadilla actually has two tracks.
Hmm. Oh
They
yeah.
have a national track, and then they have a regional track in the back, which is all natural. There's nothing done to the track in the back to make jumps or bumps or anything. It's all natural back there. And Greg and them, they were great people to work for up there at Unadilla.
Now, what was the time era that you did that?
Oh, I did that right up until I left when you guys, somebody else started announcing at Royal. Basically, when I moved to Texas, that's when I gave up all that stuff.
Hmm. Gotcha. So, you obviously you've worked for Jim Blaze. How was he towards you?
He was my brother from another mother. Blaze
Oh,
was.
he's
Blaze,
awesome.
when I got there, he basically turned it over to me as the announcer for practice. I was always on him. I wanted it to get over with, so I was on the guys. The practice order. And amateur, expert, novice. Junior. I was after him. And when one was going off the track, I was screaming at the other ones to get going because we wanted to, I wanted to be done there like 9:30, and we did pretty well, and Blaze is non-confrontational. He didn't want to be involved or get yelled at or anything. So he went down and sat in his lawn chair with the yellow flag and left it to the rest of us.
Hmm. And I when I first started up there, I was a flagger. I first started up there, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it was right when he was on his like final 2 years, and this was only 2 3 years ago, and then
Yeah.
Brooke and
Yeah.
Jake Dennis took over, and now I'm the announcer up there, which has been awesome.
Yeah,
It's a lot to keep track of though, because like as you know, when you got 32 riders coming up into one turn, you got to make sure you know who's at least gonna get out in front of it.
yeah.
Who the
Unadilla, you had
rider is.
50.
Yeah.
Always had 50 at Unadilla, and I was doing the quad nationals at Unadilla, and that's when they had the electronic scoring.
Hmm.
And I had a guy working with me from Tennessee. He was part of the AMA thing, and he came in as part of the package for the quad nationals. And that's when they first started using the transmitters on the motorcycles for scoring, and they would go past a receiver, but they had the transponders were on their boot. It wasn't on the car; it was right on their right boot. So when they went by, they got scored on the quads. And about,
Hmm.
I don't know, in the early moto, the first go round, they lost the scoring.
Ooh.
And the guy that was working with me from Tennessee, who was traveling with him, he couldn't announce the race because he was so dependent on the scoring and on the computer that he couldn't keep track of more than the first one or two quads,
Mhm.
and so basically after about 10 minutes he went and sat in the corner, and I did the whole rest of the thing. And it was kind of interesting situation that they lost the electronics and they lost the ability to call the race.
Mhm.
But it was that's what they got now, so it makes it easy.
Yeah.
Most of them guys that I worked with at Steel City or any of them other tracks, they just sat in front of the computer and they didn't even look at the race.
Mhm.
No, they just looked at the computer, but which was what they were doing. That's technology, like you said. That's the way it is now. It's the technology. I remember announcing a World of Outlaw race at Super Dirt Week in Syracuse, where the race went so fast. It was 25 laps and it went green to checkers. And I had trouble getting back past the fifth car as they went by, because they'd be right around and back on you again, so you really didn't get a chance to go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15. You couldn't get back there,
Yeah.
because they were
Mhm.
going by it so fast. It went green to checkers and they never had a caution. So that was over. And like the whole race was over in like 10 minutes, boom, boom, boom.
So
You know?
so you got to announce for the World of Outlaws. I'm sure that had to be
Yeah.
that's surreal.
When Ted Johnson was running the World of Outlaws, I did the Outlaws at Rolling Wheels
Mhm.
a couple of times. I did them at Super Dirt Week in Syracuse, and they were fun. And I went down into Pennsylvania and went down there, and I worked with Ernie Saxton at a race down there in Pennsylvania, which was different, but it was fun. And they were very fast.
Oh yeah. Sprint cars or late models?
yeah, sprint cars.
Sprint cars. Okay.
And they were, I announced the race when Sammy Swindell lost the race because a $2.19 air valve for his wing broke. And that
I'm
was an
sure
interesting.
if I know Sammy Swindell, he probably wasn't happy about that.
Well, after the race was over, Andy Fusco was doing the TV for Dirt Vision.
Mhm.
And he went to walk into Sammy's trailer. He didn't know Sammy. I knew him. And he
Mhm.
went to walk in the trailer, and Sammy wouldn't even talk to him. And so
Yeah.
then Jack Burgess said to me, he says, go get an interview with Sammy Swindell. We got some time to kill. I walked in and he did an interview with me, which was, and Andy Fusco and Doug Logan are standing outside looking in, and he wouldn't even talk to them. It was kind of interesting, but like you said, it's who
Yeah.
that, fun, because he knew I wasn't going to go in there and ask him, anything stupid,
Mhm.
and say, Sammy, you lost this $25,000 race to win for a $2.19 air valve. I wouldn't have asked that. That wouldn't have
No.
been one of my questions.
Mhm. And I mean, you look at Sammy Swindell. Obviously,
Yep.
he's a legendary driver.
Oh, absolutely.
He's still going.
Yep.
I
He's still
give him
going.
all the credit in the world because he's still going. But
Yeah.
I've never gotten a chance to talk to him. I would like to, honestly, because I've heard a lot of good things about him. I've heard a lot of
Depends on how his day
interesting
is
things
going.
about him that I'm not going to talk about. But I've heard a lot of good things about him. I'd like
Yeah,
to.
you gotta figure out how his day is going and when you approach him. So
Yeah, because I've heard he's.
kind of like CD Colville. He was the same way.
Oh yeah,
CD was the same way.
I've talked to CD before. He's a nice guy,
Oh,
obviously.
he's different now.
Oh yeah, he's well. It seems like a lot of drivers are like that. Once they step out of the race car,
Oh yeah.
they
Yep.
calm down. But absolutely. So now jumping over to the track I announced at with Toby Lagrange on Sundays, Glen Ridge Motorsports Park. How did you first get in with the Ridge over on Sunday nights?
Well,
Oh, it was actually Friday nights probably when you started.
well, I was doing actually I was doing Sundays. I was when Custom was there.
Oh, Custom
I,
Bob. Yeah.
I was Custom Bob, better late than never, Nemitz, and I was doing the on Sundays, and then I came back to the Ridge on Fridays when Mike and Jake took over. I was announcing at Accord and for Gary Palmer, and then Mike and Jake took over the Ridge, and it seemed like, and Jake wanted me there, and it seemed like common sense to me to drive 10 miles to go to work on Sunday or on Friday night rather than driving to Newburgh and Kingston on Friday and back. So I just made the change. I left. I told Gary Palmer, and we parted friends, and I came back to the Ridge on Friday night, and the guy that was assistant announcer at Middletown took over at Ackworth.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when I went back to the Ridge, is when Jake and Mike took it over, and that's when I started working with them.
Now, what are some of your favorite Glen Ridge memories?
Oh, a lot of them up there. I was, Rocky's dad, Don Warner, the Silver Fox.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of my favorites. I always enjoyed being. It was a lot of fun up there.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, I'd sit in the tower up there and have Mike Romano standing next to you on the radios talking to the drivers. And I had to turn the mic off because he was screaming so loud. It was going out over it went out the windows of the announcer's tower, but it was going out
Yeah,
over. He was screaming.
it sounds like present day. We had the same problem.
Screaming over and going over the microphone. And I think we had 5 cars in a Consi one night, and they were out there crashing each other. They were all qualified, and I thought Mike was going to lose his mind that night when he was screaming at those guys. But it was fun. The place was cool. It was a little corner of the world where they were trying to make a buck and giving guys a chance to race, and it was a lot of fun. I didn't like it when the wind blew hard and the tower swayed, but other than that, it was okay.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It still does it.
And
It still does it today.
And I had Bob Lansing there with me, and it was good people. They were it was good people, and it was fun. It was fun. A good way to have some fun on a Sunday night.
So you mentioned Bob Lansing. How was working with him? Obviously, Bob is now a photographer still over at the Ridge. I've worked with him a little bit every now and then. Bob is one of the he's like a jack of all trades, if you ask me.
He was running the scoring. He was the scoring guy then. That was his job.
Mm-hmm.
That was Bob Lansing's job.
But getting to work with him, he's obviously one of the.
Oh, he's a super guy.
Yeah, absolutely,
he's awesome. Absolutely a super guy. I call him once in a while. I like to call him at work to give him a break.
Yeah.
So that he can take a pause and bust my chops, instead of doing insurance forms.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Couple more things here. This is kind of some questions I like to ask all my guests that come on the podcast. Now, you mentioned you wouldn't want to step in a race car, but if you could and could race any driver, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, wow. Geez, I don't know. The guys that drove for us over the years, Dutch Reed, Lee Millington, Don Wayman, Roger Gauthier, Ken Shoemaker, all these guys drove for us, and it would be fun to go out there and race around with those guys a little bit. We had a lot of my brother Todd. It'd be fun to race my brother Todd because he and I used to race motorcycles together, and I could we were pretty even on the motorcycles, but I know that it'd be fun to go out there with him. But he'd lap me in about 3 laps probably.
Absolutely. And now this question's this one's gonna make you think here for a second, and I'm gonna give you a local one because you've done a lot of local work, and then I'm gonna let you do a national one. If there was a racing Mount Rushmore, who were the 4 names?
Oh, for local?
Yeah, and then one. I'll let you do national too, but we'll start with local.
I would say locally it would be Jack naturally, Louis, Dave Lape, and Steve Danish.
Okay, and then on a national level.
Oh my God! My interest. Oh, and it mean like NASCAR?
Just and in general, and like a national, like going to like World of Outlaws.
Natural drivers. I always liked Sterling Marlin, Richard Petty. God, the guys when they came to Fonda back in the days, that raced there. Those were my heroes. When they came to Fonda in the '60s and Albany, Saratoga in the '60s. They were all heroes then.
Did Dale Earnhardt ever race Fonda?
Not that I know of. I don't think so.
That's what
Richard
I'd like.
Petty won at Fonda. David Pearson won at Fonda.
Mhm.
Bobby Allison won at Albany, Saratoga. Those guys were here. And when they came to town to race at Fonda, my dad had a big garage in downtown Gloversville, which is now Nethaways. And down behind the offices underneath was where the oil trucks were. And Richard Petty and Wendell Scott, when they came to Fonda to race, that's where they parked their cars and worked on them before they went to the track to race. They down underneath my dad's garage. So that's where I met Richard and Linda Petty and Kyle Petty when he was a little guy running around, and his Richard's whole bunch there, his brother-in-law and all them, they were all there.
Now here's my question for you, because I have a paper here that I keep in my collection over here from 1969, the NASCAR schedule. Were you announcing it at that time?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
So
I started Fonda in 72.
okay, so 72, because I'm looking at the NASCAR. I got a paper from 1969 right here of the NASCAR schedule, and I was curious. I was curious to find out that the race at Fonda, which was supposed to be on July 10th that year, was canceled because of rain. Obviously, that happens. But Richard Petty, they rescheduled. Richard Petty won that year, but yeah, that was. I didn't know if you were an announcer back then.
No,
The NASCAR.
I started in 72. So
Mhm.
just go 72 to 50 years, and that would have been last year. The whole thing was that was back in the day when the NASCAR was the Grand National Series, and they were running about 90 races a year.
Yep.
You know,
And I look at the schedule. Yeah, it's.
they Islip, the Albany, Saratoga, they would be everywhere.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I
Bobby,
love it.
Bobby Ice, all those guys. It's kind of fun.
Absolutely. Well, I'm not gonna keep you here all night because there's obviously you got things to do. I got things to do. I got to edit this podcast, but I appreciate you coming on the show. My
No,
final topic here is for me as a up and coming announcer. What advice could you give me?
have fun, enjoy it, have fun, do your homework,
Mhm.
try to find something that nobody else knows. Dig. I mean, if you're talking to a driver, what does he do for a living? Is he a plumber? Is he a carpenter? Or is this what he does for a living? Does he work in a garage? I mean, just like your pro stock guy, Kenny Gates. What does Kenny Gates do for a living? Where's he work?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
kind of that stuff, and when you get something where you have something where you got to fill, then you got stuff to fill with, other than saying that, hey, everybody, buy Goodyear tires or buy True Oil or whatever, and people get tired of hearing that, and they don't want to hear music.
Mhm.
That was my big pet peeves was the music. I used to take a radio, and I'd set a radio up in the tower at Fonda, and I would take a radio to the pits, and I'd do driver interviews over. I couldn't do it with a wireless because naturally we had nothing that went that far, but we did have radios, and I had a couple of radios, and I would go up there and tape the radio speaker to the microphone and put it underneath a box. And then I'd go down to the pits and I could do interviews with the radio over that. And I would go in and throw the switch. So the pit went to the grandstand PA system rather than the pit PA. So I could hear what I was saying. Of course, you have that delay, where you start to talk and you can't hear yourself right away quick because you got the delay. So you had to practice a little bit so that you weren't falling all over yourself. But, I mean, that's the kind of stuff. Yeah, of course, you can't do that anymore because Brett Deo's got 7,000 commercials, and 355 sponsors. So, you got those guys, I feel bad for them sometimes, because they have to have the ad book and they keep going and going and going and going, which is, I mean, when I was doing national motocross, they had an ad book and they had a guy that did the ad book. That's all he did was do the ad book. So when he got a lull, he would do it. When I was doing the national snowcross series, traveling all over the country, doing the WPSA and WSA snowcross and rock maple racing, and same thing there. They had an ad book. When we were doing the Winter X Games, in Park City, and the Winter X Games out in Wisconsin and Mount Snow. Same thing. They had a guy that came in. So you were the talent, and they had a guy that came in and barely spoke English, and he did the ad book. which didn't really make any sense to me. But
Yeah,
that's
that sounds a little odd.
yeah. Brady, there's 1,000 things you can do out there if you're willing to travel a little bit. No,
Absolutely.
1,000 things. It's fun. You get to meet a lot of great people. I still have friends that I talk to from snowcross racing, from Rock Maple Racing back in 2001. I still hear from them. So that's, you make the friends, and it's a pretty neat deal, actually. Now, am I interested in doing it now? Not really. Not really. I've had my day, you know.
And I was just gonna ask you that if we were gonna hear Jim King on the microphone again.
Well, if I lived, uh, 10 miles, 20 miles from Fonda or 20 miles from Glen Ridge or wherever, that'd be fun maybe. But man, I'm way too old to travel all that distance anymore. And my wife would kill me. So that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah.
I gotta
Keep
throw in a
going.
couple. I gotta throw in a couple sponsor plugs here as well.
Go get 'em.
Swagger Factory Apparel, of course. They make these awesome shirts that I got on
Oh,
right
yeah.
now, and they do a bunch of fire suits. Mikey Jackson is one of the best, and then
Great guy.
yes, and then Tad Parks from Parks Companies, also a proud sponsor of the podcast, and he's done a lot for me in my podcast, so I have to throw out there. And then another
Yeah.
quick shout out to Kennedy Payne Media for helping me out with my recent social media. It's been pretty good to having somebody help me
Well,
out with that a little bit.
the whole thing about what we do and what we did is I don't care how great an announcer you are, you got to have the pipes. You got to have the voice. If you don't have the voice, my godfather in announcing, the guy who gave me every opportunity and opened the doors for me was Jack Burgess. Jack Burgess. We were at Syracuse. They were doing time trials. Jack and I are working together, and Jack Johnson comes out, takes his time trial at Syracuse. He comes off the fourth turn. He crosses the line, and Jack Burgess says, "Jumping Jack Johnson, not good enough." That's all he had to say. Not good enough, but you got to have the pipes, and you got to, but anyways, you got it. So just keep going, man.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Jim, for coming on the show. Thank you, everybody,
Anytime.
for tuning in on the podcast. Of course, this is Jim King, myself, Brady Hauser. Hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. If you are new here or to the YouTube channel, make sure you click the like, comment, and subscribe button. And click that little notification bell when you hit subscribe on the YouTube button. You will not miss an upload when you click on that bell. It'll pop up on your screen every time I post a video. We got a busy weekend ahead. Albany Saratoga Speedway tomorrow. Royal Mountain this weekend for the District 3 weekend. I got
one of my favorites.
I got Fonda, I got Glenridge, and then I got Land of Legends on Monday. So there's gonna be a lot coming to the podcast this weekend. So stay tuned for that. You're not gonna want to miss it. But again, Jim, thanks for coming on. And you got any closing remarks?
No. One thing I wanted to mention was Cairo Fairgrounds Speedway in Cairo, New York. I was the only announcer they ever had, and the track lasted 5 weeks before the town closed it down. It was an adventure. Look it up.
I'm gonna have to look into that because they only lasted 5 weeks, so there's probably not much out there about it. But I'll have to dig deep and look
Kenny
into it.
Shoemaker and a guy by the name of Matty Cirillo were the promoters.
Interesting.
Cool. All right, brother. Do well. Talk to you again.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you coming on the show.